Dr. Kubler-Ross, you probably have heard about more. She was a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I don't know, at the Chicago medical, at a hospital in Chicago, medical school I think there, helping patients with cancer and their families. She has made many conclusions about facing death, and we will discuss them especially when we discuss how to help loved ones who are passing away. In her investigation, she became convinced of life after death and also convinced of the existence of reincarnation. And an interesting psychological study by Helen Wambach, who has written the book Life Before Life, in which she does hypnosis. And before she wrote this book, she had done hypnosis on 750 subjects in group situations, in which she asked them about questions about before choosing their birth, if they chose their parents, if they chose their sex, if they chose their nationality, why they chose to be born, and their birth experience. So the question is, if we study these 12 different sources, will we get common answers or will they differ? Okay? And so now we begin this process of investigating these sources. First of all, as to whether the spirit or the soul continues to exist after death. Here is a piece by Carl Jung, the famous psychologist and student of Sigmund Freud. Each of the four religions affirms that there is a subtle and death-surviving element, vital and psychical, in the physical body of flesh and blood. Whether it be a permanent entity or self, as the Brahmanic Atman, as the Muslim Ruh, as the Christian soul, or whether it only be a complex of activities, or skandha, psychical and physical, with life as their function, which is the Buddhist concept. Thus, to none of the faiths is death an absolute ending, but to all it is only the separation of the psyche from the gross body. These are the words of Carl Jung. So we see that all religions agree, and this psychologist agrees, that death is not the end of what we see, but just a transition. Satya Sai Baba, a very powerful teacher in India today. Death is a state very much like sleep. The individual discards his body like an old worn-out suit of clothes. Only the body perishes. As the mind has no physical form, it does not perish with the body. And thought activity persists even after the death of the physical body. Did I mention to you the experience that my brother-in-law had after my father's assassination with the doors in the house? No? An example, I had a clear personal example of the mind continuing after the body. My father had a fetish with oiling all the doors in the house every Saturday morning. This is something that my brother-in-law didn't know. He was married to my sister only 6 months when my father passed away. And so after we went up to the mountains and we wanted to bury my father, but the ground was frozen. This is in the mountains of Lebanon. And so we had to put him in a tomb until the spring when they could dig, and so they could bury the body. And Mustafa, my brother-in-law, went into trance. And when I woke him up, I said, "Where were you?" He said, "I was with our father." And he said, "Well, how is he?" And he said, "He's fine. He's worried a little bit about your mother, and he's worried a little bit about the university." But he said to me something very strange. He said, "Please have someone come up to the tomb and oil the doors of the tomb." Now, obviously, I'm sure my father was not still obsessed with the oiling of the doors. It was like he was giving us a message, "I exist." You see? Which for me, because my brother-in-law had no idea of this thing, it was a very clear message, "I exist." Otherwise, why would he ever think of oiling the doors of the tomb? That was a very clear message for me. From Alice Bailey, in her book Esoteric Healing. Death, if we could but realize it, is one of our most practiced activities. We have died many, many times. We have died many times and shall die again and again. Death is essentially a matter of consciousness. We are consciousness one moment on the physical plane, and a moment later we have withdrawn onto another plane, and we are actively conscious there. Just as long as our consciousness is identified with the form aspect, that is with the body, death will hold for us its ancient terror. Just as soon as we know ourselves to be souls and find that we are capable of focusing our consciousness or sense of awareness in any form or in any plane at will, or in any direction within the form of God, we shall no longer know death. There is no death. There is simply the moving of our consciousness out of its identification with the physical body and the experiencing of another plane of consciousness. What does Socrates say? That it is simply the release of the soul from the body. Is death nothing more or less than this? The separate condition of the body by itself when it is released from the soul, and the separate condition by itself of the soul when released from the body. Is death nothing else than this? Of course, Socrates always talked in questions. The miastiki, that is his technique of asking questions to bring truth out of people. Something else about Socrates. This is from a book by a Greek Orthodox theologian, George Meleti, in which he says, "But the most incomparable example of faith in the immortality of the soul in history is that of Socrates." Of course, I'm surprised that this Christian theologian uses Socrates, because Socrates believes in reincarnation, but he doesn't mention that aspect. He mentions only what he says here. In Plato's Phaedon, his genius mind uses unrivaled dialectics to support and prove his faith in immortality. He defines death as mere separation of the soul from the body, a fact which is not unpleasant at all, but rather it is the release from the limitations of the body that imprisons the soul with its senses. The soul and the body, according to Socrates, are related to each other in the same way as the guitarist and the guitar. The body, which is the guitar, and the soul is the guitarist. Death, which destroys the guitar, does not in any way harm the guitarist. So the body is our instrument, an instrument which we take on when we incarnate, when we come into this physical world, which we use and which we very well should care for, the body, all throughout our life, because it's like caring for your car. If you don't care for it, it's going to break down. You're not going to be able to go anywhere. You're not going to be able to do things. So we care for the body, not because it is us, but because it is our vehicle. And I want to love this vehicle and care for this vehicle so that it can take me through this journey of life with less pain, in a more effective way. But at the end of the life, I get out. Many people want to say, I am the soul, but I am also the body. I cannot accept this. I cannot be something I'm going to get out of. I cannot be my car. I can be in my car, I can be using my car, but it is a vehicle. I cannot be the vehicle. So I am an unlimited consciousness which is temporarily focused in this physical vehicle, which is expressing itself through this vehicle, and which unfortunately is being mesmerized by this vehicle to identify with it. And as more I'm identified with this vehicle, the more I fear for it, the more I'm identified with how it appears to others, whether others accept it or not, whether others love it or not. I evaluate my self-worth in terms of my vehicle, in relationship to your vehicle, and whether mine is more beautiful or more intelligent or richer or more successful. And I get lost in this whole illusion, which creates so much unhappiness in my life, because I, as an immortal consciousness, have been identified with this temporary vehicle. Now, what exactly is the moment of death? First of all, Seth explains to us that death is a continuous process. That is, I have died to who I was. That is, my body contains virtually, except for some nerve cells, no cells that were there 7 years ago. I am like a river of cells. Also, my mind is not the same. I cannot say that I am the same person I was at 2 years old, at 7 years old, at 15 years old. The mind is dying and the body is dying. Death is a process of continual change. It's a process which we are going through continuously. But let us examine for a moment the actual moment of death. The moment that is not of death, but of the transfer of consciousness from the body to the non-body focused state. Before we read Raymond Moody's description after examining 150 people, which agrees 100% with what you saw in the video in the BBC here, I would like to point out that you have various questionnaires which I would like you to work with in order to go through this process. Look at page 1 in your questionnaires. How do you imagine your departure from your physical body? There are 4 questions here. You have one from last week, no? I gave you last week. Whatever you don't have, we'll see later. Let's focus now. How do you imagine it will be when you leave your physical body? Are you afraid at all of this process? If yes, what are you most afraid of concerning your leaving the physical body? Right here, whatever fears you can think of. Okay, so asking you to imagine your departure from your physical body and to note down any fears that you have. 3. Which truths or beliefs would you like to strengthen in order to face your own departure more peacefully and perhaps even joyfully? Why not? It's a great, exciting adventure. We're going to go to a new place. We're going to get out of this body, which is probably, by the time we leave it, not in very good shape. Unless you have an accident or something. Right? So, I mean, it should be a pleasure to get out of this body and enjoy the freedom of moving around. And 4, what would you like to have done or completed concerning others or your work, or in general concerning your life, in order to feel more ready and more comfortable in leaving your body? Okay? Athena, these are not the same. No. Okay. So, you can look at these questions for next time, try to answer them, and then we will get together and share. Okay? Now, let's read Raymond Moody's description of which he has taken from asking all these questions of all these people. He has put in this description only aspects which have been repeated by many people. Okay? He has put nothing which has been expressed by 1 or 2 persons.